The lawyer's office smelled of polished wood and regret, a sterile tomb for the remnants of Patrick Sullivan's fractured family. At 28, Patrick sat rigid in a leather chair, his emerald eyes fixed on the manila envelope in his hands, its weight heavier than the single-dollar bill it contained. His father's will, his final word, had reduced Patrick's existence to a cruel, singular joke. Around the mahogany table, his siblings, Claire, the eldest, with her sharp jawline and sharper ambition, and Michael, the golden child who'd always played by their father's rules, exchanged uneasy glances. The lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, adjusted his glasses, his voice steady but tinged with unease. "There's one more thing," he said, sliding a USB drive across the table toward Patrick. "Your father left a video message. For you alone." Patrick's heart lurched. Richard Sullivan, the man who'd built a real estate empire in Manhattan and ruled his family with an iron fist, hadn't spoken to Patrick in 5 years. Not since the night Patrick came out as gay, and Richard's face had twisted with disgust before he'd walked away forever. Now, $1 in a video? It felt like another slap, a final twist of the knife. He clutched the USB, his knuckles whitening, and excused himself, ignoring Claire's probing stare and Michael's forced sympathy. Outside, the Manhattan streets pulsed with life, taxis honking, pedestrians weaving through the chaos, but Patrick felt like he was drowning. He tucked the USB into his jacket pocket and headed toward Central Park, his sanctuary since childhood. The crisp October air stung his cheeks, grounding him as he found a quiet bench beneath a canopy of fiery leaves. There, he pulled out his phone, plugged in earbuds, and, with a trembling hand, played the video. Richard's face filled the screen, older than Patrick remembered, his steel-gray hair thinner, his blue eyes hollow. "Patrick," he began, his voice gravelly but deliberate. "If you're watching this, I'm gone. And you're probably holding that damn $1. A bitter laugh escaped the screen, and Patrick flinched. "You think it's an insult, don't you? It's not. It's a key. Find the lock." The words hit like a thunderclap. Patrick paused the video, his breath shallow. A key? His father had always spoken in riddles, a habit that infuriated Patrick as a teenager. But this felt different, calculated, urgent. He pressed play again. Richard leaned closer to the camera, his expression softening, almost pleading. "Go to the old cabin in the Catskills. There's something you need to see. Something I couldn't say while I was alive. And Patrick, I'm sorry." The video cut to black. Patrick sat frozen, the park's hum fading into a dull roar in his ears. "Sorry." Richard Sullivan didn't apologize. Not to his boardroom rivals. Not to his wife during their bitter divorce. And certainly not to the son he'd disowned. Yet the word lingered, a ghost Patrick couldn't shake. His phone buzzed, snapping him back. A text from Julian, his boyfriend of 2 years. "You okay? Need me?" Patrick's lips curved into a faint smile. Julian Carter, with his warm brown eyes and unshakable calm, had been Patrick's anchor through every storm. They'd met at a Brooklyn art gallery, where Julian's photography, raw, vivid captures of city life, had drawn Patrick in, but it was Julian's quiet strength that kept him close. He typed back, "Meet me at the park? Need to talk." 30 minutes later, Julian arrived, his tall frame cutting through the crowd, his gray sweater hugging his athletic build. He sat beside Patrick, their knees brushing, and listened as Patrick recounted the will, the $1, the video. Julian's brow furrowed, but his hand found Patrick's, grounding him. "Sounds like a puzzle," Julian said, his voice low and steady. "Your dad was a control freak. Even in death, he's pulling strings. You don't have to play his game." But Patrick's mind was already racing. The Catskills cabin, an old family retreat they'd abandoned after his mother left, had been his father's obsession, a place where Richard escaped to think, he'd said. "What was there? Why now?" "I need to know," Patrick murmured, his gaze distant. "I need to understand why he hated me so much." Julian squeezed his hand. "He didn't hate you, Patrick. He was scared of what he didn't understand. But if you're doing this, I'm coming with you." That evening, they packed a rental car and drove north, the city's lights fading into the inky darkness of the Catskills. The cabin loomed ahead, a weathered wooden structure nestled among pines, its windows dark like unblinking eyes. Inside, it smelled of dust and memories, Patrick's childhood summers, his father's rare laughter, the warmth of a family that no longer existed. They searched for hours, combing through old furniture, creaking floorboards, and faded photo albums. Nothing. Exhausted, Patrick slumped onto the couch, the dollar bill crumpled in his fist. "This is pointless," he muttered. Julian knelt beside him, brushing a lock of dark hair from Patrick's forehead. "We'll find it, whatever it is." Then, Patrick's eyes caught a glint beneath the fireplace mantel, a small, rusted keyhole. His pulse quickened. He pulled the dollar from his pocket, examining it under the dim light. On the bill, scrawled in faint ink, was a number, 47. A combination? A code? He turned to Julian, hope flickering. "This is it. The lock." They pried open the mantel, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a locked metal box, its surface engraved with the initials RS. Patrick's hands shook as he inserted the dollar bill's edge into the keyhole, a wild guess born of desperation. It didn't fit. Of course it didn't. But the number, 47, nagged at him. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on an old rotary phone in the corner, untouched for decades. With Julian watching, Patrick dialed 47. A click echoed from the box. His breath caught as he lifted the lid, revealing a stack of letters, yellowed with age, and a small, leather-bound journal. The letters were addressed to Patrick, in his father's handwriting. His heart pounded as he opened the first one, dated 10 years ago. "Patrick, I don't know how to say this, so I'm writing it. I'm proud of you, even if I don't understand you. I'm trying." The words blurred as tears welled in Patrick's eyes. Julian's arm wrapped around him, steady and warm, as Patrick read on, each letter peeling back layers of a man he thought he'd known, a man who'd struggled, failed, and regretted in silence. But the journal was different. Its pages were filled with dates, names, and transactions, records of deals, payments, and secrets that didn't belong in a family cabin. Patrick's stomach twisted. This wasn't just about him. This was bigger, and it was dangerous. The Catskills cabin felt smaller now, its walls closing in as Patrick clutched the journal, its pages heavy with secrets. Moonlight filtered through the dusty windows, casting shadows over Julian's concerned face. "What is it?" he asked, his voice a low anchor in the storm brewing in Patrick's chest. Patrick flipped through the journal, his fingers trembling. The entries were meticulous: dates, dollar amounts, names of people Patrick didn't recognize, and cryptic notes about deals and leverage. One name appeared repeatedly: Vincent Moretti. Patrick's breath hitched. Moretti was a name whispered in New York's underbelly, a man tied to organized crime, someone his father had no business knowing. Yet here, in Richard Sullivan's precise handwriting, were records of meetings, payments, and favors owed. "This isn't about me," Patrick whispered, his voice cracking. "This is evidence." He handed the journal to Julian, who scanned it, his jaw tightening. "Your dad was into some dark stuff," Julian said, his tone careful. "This could ruin people. Powerful people." Patrick's mind reeled. His father had built Sullivan Properties into a Manhattan juggernaut, but at what cost? The letters to Patrick, raw, apologetic, almost tender, clashed with the journal's cold calculations. Was Richard trying to make amends, or was this another game? The dollar bill, the video, the key, it all pointed to this box. But why drag Patrick into it? Julian set the journal down and pulled Patrick close, his warmth cutting through the chill of the cabin. "We need to be careful," he said. "If this is what it looks like, someone's going to want it back." Patrick nodded, but his thoughts were spiraling. He'd come for answers about his father's rejection, not to uncover a conspiracy. They decided to sleep on it, though sleep was a generous term. Patrick lay awake on the cabin's creaky mattress, Julian's arm draped over him, the journal's weight pressing on his mind. At dawn, they packed the letters and journal into a backpack and drove back to the city, the dollar bill tucked safely in Patrick's wallet. The Manhattan skyline greeted them, its glittering towers now ominous, hiding secrets in their shadows. Back in their Brooklyn apartment, Patrick spread the letters across the dining table, each one a glimpse into his father's conflicted heart. One, dated 2 years ago, read, "I saw you with him, Patrick, at that gallery. You looked happy. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know how." Patrick's throat tightened. Richard had been there, watching from a distance, too proud or too broken to bridge the gap. Julian, brewing coffee in the kitchen, glanced over. He was trying, in his own messed-up way, he said. "But this journal, it's a different story. Patrick nodded, opening the journal again. One entry caught his eye. Moretti threatens exposure. Paid $500,000 to keep silent. Must protect Patrick. Protect him? From what? Before they could dig deeper, Patrick's phone rang. It was Claire, her voice clipped and urgent. Patrick, where are you? We need to talk about Dad's will. Now. Her tone set Patrick's nerves on edge. Claire had always been calculating, her loyalty to the family business outweighing everything else. Did she know about the journal? They met at a crowded midtown cafe, Claire's designer suit a stark contrast to Patrick's casual jeans and sweater. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. What did Dad leave you? Besides that pathetic dollar. Her words stung, but Patrick kept his face neutral. Just a video, he lied, his pulse racing. Sentimental stuff. Claire didn't buy it. He always favored you. Even after everything, she said, her voice dripping with resentment. If you're hiding something, Patrick, it won't end well. She left without another word, her heels clicking on the pavement like a warning. Back home, Julian urged Patrick to take the journal to the authorities, but Patrick hesitated. This could destroy my family, he said, pacing. Claire and Michael. They'd be ruined if Sullivan Properties is tied to Moretti. Julian grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to stop. And if you keep this, you're a target. We both are. That night, Patrick couldn't sleep. He slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Julian, and opened his laptop, searching for Vincent Moretti. The results were chilling. Articles about money laundering, racketeering, and a real estate scandal that never quite stuck. One grainy photo showed Moretti, a broad-shouldered man with cold eyes, shaking hands with a city official. In the background, barely visible, was Richard Sullivan. Patrick's stomach churned. He needed answers, not just for himself, but for the truth his father had buried. The next morning, he and Julian drove to Sullivan Properties headquarters, a sleek glass tower in Manhattan. Patrick hadn't been there in years, not since his father banned him from the premises. The receptionist, a young woman with a tight smile, buzzed them up to Michael's office. Michael, polished in a tailored suit, greeted them with a strained smile. Patrick, good to see you, he said, though his eyes darted to Julian, lingering with unease. Patrick cut to the chase. Did Dad ever mention Vincent Moretti? Michael's face paled, his smile vanishing. Why would you ask that? Patrick pulled out the journal, watching his brother's reaction. Michael's hands trembled as he flipped through it, his voice low. You shouldn't have this. Where did you find it? Before Patrick could answer, the office door swung open, and Claire stormed in, her eyes blazing. You idiot, she hissed at Patrick. You're going to get us all killed. The air in Michael's office crackled with tension, Claire's accusation hanging like a guillotine. Patrick gripped the journal, his heart pounding as Julian stepped closer, a silent shield. Killed, Patrick repeated, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. What the hell is going on, Claire? She paced, her heels stabbing the carpet. You think Dad built this empire on charm and hard work? She snapped. He made deals, Patrick. Dirty ones. And that journal. She pointed at it, her hand shaking. It's a death sentence if the wrong people know you have it. Michael sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. She's right, he muttered. Dad was in deep with Moretti. Real estate deals, money laundering, political favors. He tried to get out, but you don't just walk away from someone like that. His eyes met Patrick's, pleading. He left you that dollar to keep you out of it. To protect you. Patrick's chest tightened. Protect him? By cutting him out of the family, the business, his life? The letters in the cabin painted a different picture. A father wrestling with guilt, not a mastermind shielding his son. Then why the video? Patrick pressed. Why send me to the cabin? Claire stopped pacing, her eyes narrowing. What video? Patrick hesitated, realizing he'd said too much. Julian's hand brushed his, a subtle reminder to stay sharp. Just Dad saying he was sorry, Patrick said, dodging her gaze. Claire didn't push, but her silence was heavier than words. They left the office with more questions than answers, the journal hidden in Julian's backpack. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual chaos, but Patrick felt eyes on them. Real or imagined, he couldn't tell. We need to figure out who Moretti's working with, Julian said as they ducked into a subway station. If your dad was scared, there's a bigger player involved. Back in Brooklyn, they pored over the journal, cross-referencing names with online searches. One entry mentioned a Councilman Reed, tied to a rezoning deal that pushed through a luxury development in Queens. A quick search revealed Daniel Reed, a rising political star with a clean public image but whispers of corruption. Another name, L. Carver, appeared beside a $200,000 payment. No first name, no context, just a ghost in the pages. Patrick's phone buzzed, an unknown number. Against Julian's warning glance, he answered. A low, gravelly voice said, "You've got something that doesn't belong to you, Sullivan. Return it, or your boyfriend won't be so pretty anymore." The line went dead. Patrick's hand shook as he set the phone down, his eyes meeting Julian's. "They know," he whispered. Julian's face hardened, but he pulled Patrick into a fierce embrace. "We're in this together," he said, his voice unwavering. "They don't get to touch you." Patrick clung to him, the warmth of Julian's arms a lifeline in the rising tide of fear. But the threat lingered, a shadow they couldn't outrun. They decided to lay low, staying at Julian's friend's apartment in Harlem while they planned their next move. The friend, Marcus, a burly photographer with a quick laugh, didn't ask questions, just handed them keys and a bottle of wine. "Stay safe, you two," he said, his eyes lingering on Julian with a knowing warmth. Patrick felt a pang of gratitude for their small, chosen family, people who didn't flinch at who they were. Over the next 2 days, Patrick and Julian dug deeper. They found an article about a 2018 investigation into Sullivan Properties, dropped for lack of evidence. The journal's dates aligned perfectly. Richard had been covering his tracks, but why leave the journal for Patrick? Was it trust, or a final act of manipulation? On the third night, Patrick woke to a noise, a soft creak from the apartment's hallway. Julian was already up, his silhouette tense in the moonlight. "Stay here," he whispered, grabbing a baseball bat Marcus kept by the door. Patrick's heart raced as he followed anyway, ignoring Julian's protest. The hallway was empty, but a note had been slipped under the door. 48 hours. Pier 17. Bring the journal. Panic surged, but Julian's steady hand on his shoulder kept Patrick grounded. "We need help," Julian said. "Someone we can trust." Patrick thought of Detective Elena Vasquez, a friend from his college days who'd joined the NYPD. She'd always been fierce, fair, and discreet. He called her, explaining just enough to get her to meet them at a diner in the Bronx. Elena listened, her dark eyes sharp as she sipped black coffee. "Moretti's a big fish, but he's not untouchable," she said, scanning a few journal pages Patrick had photographed. "This Reed guy, though, he's connected. City Hall, donors, the works. If your dad was tangled up with them, this journal could blow it all open." She leaned closer, her voice low. "But you're in danger, Patrick. Both of you. Let me take this to my captain." Patrick hesitated. Handing over the journal meant losing control, risking his family's legacy. But keeping it meant risking their lives. Julian's hand found his under the table, a silent vote of confidence. "Okay," Patrick said finally. "But we need protection." Elena nodded. "I'll arrange it. Lay low until I call." As they left the diner, Patrick felt the weight of the journal in his backpack, a ticking bomb. He glanced at Julian, whose warm eyes held a promise. "We'll get through this." But the note's deadline loomed, and Patrick couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The Harlem apartment felt like a cage, its walls too thin to keep out the dread creeping into Patrick's bones. The note's deadline, 48 hours, ticked down like a heartbeat, each second tightening the noose. Julian sat across from him, scrolling through news articles on his laptop, his brow furrowed but his presence a steady comfort. Elena called at midnight, her voice clipped. "We've got a safe house in Queens. Stay there until I can get the journal to my captain. And Patrick, don't do anything stupid." Patrick promised to comply, but the journal burned a hole in his backpack, its secrets too heavy to ignore. He needed to understand his father's role before handing it over. They arrived at the safe house, a nondescript row home with peeling paint and a creaky porch. Inside, it was sparse but clean, with a single couch and a kitchen that smelled faintly of bleach. Julian set up a makeshift workspace, spreading the journal's pages across a wobbly table. "Look at this," he said, pointing to an entry from 3 years ago. "L. Carver demands meeting. Threatens to expose RS to P." Patrick frowned. Expose Richard to him? Why? A memory surfaced. His father, years ago, arguing on the phone in the cabin, his voice low but furious. "You don't get to touch my son." Patrick had been 16, sneaking downstairs for a late-night snack, and dismissed it as business stress. Now, it felt like a puzzle piece slotting into place. "Carver," Patrick murmured. "Whoever this is, they wanted to use me against Dad." Julian's eyes softened. "Your dad was protecting you, even if he sucked at showing it." He reached for Patrick's hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles. "We'll figure this out. Together." Patrick leaned into him, their foreheads touching, the world's chaos momentarily silenced by Julian's warmth. The next morning, Patrick found a clue in the journal's final pages, a reference to a storage unit in Red Hook, Brooklyn, with a code 47-19-82. The dollar bill's number, 47, was no coincidence. "We need to go there," Patrick said, his voice firm despite Julian's worried look. If Dad left something else, it could explain everything. Against Elena's orders, they drove to Red Hook, the waterfront's industrial sprawl a stark contrast to Manhattan's gleam. The storage facility was a maze of rusted lockers, the air thick with salt and oil. Using the code, they opened Unit 47-19-82, revealing a dusty safe. Inside were documents, deeds, contracts, and a USB drive labeled for Patrick. Back at the safe house, Patrick plugged the USB into his laptop, his heart racing. Another video loaded, Richard's face older, more haggard than the first. "Patrick," he said, his voice cracking. "If you're here, you've found the journal. I never wanted you in this mess, but I was too weak to stop it." He paused, rubbing his eyes. "Moretti and Carver, they own half the city. I made deals to keep Sullivan Properties alive, but it cost me everything. You, your mother, my soul." Patrick's breath caught as Richard continued. "Carver's the real threat. Lydia Carver, councilwoman. She's got dirt on everyone, including me. I hid evidence in this safe to keep her in check, but if she knows you have it," he trailed off, his eyes glistening. "I failed you, son, but you're stronger than me. Do what I couldn't." The video ended, and Patrick sat stunned. Lydia Carver, Councilwoman Carver, was a power player in City Hall, her name synonymous with reform but shadowed by rumors. His father had been her pawn, then her enemy. And now Patrick held the evidence that could bring her down. Julian's hand found his shoulder. "This is bigger than we thought," he said. "We need to get this to Elena, now." But before they could move, the safe house's front door rattled. Footsteps echoed outside, heavy and deliberate. Julian grabbed the bat, his eyes meeting Patrick's in silent agreement. They weren't alone. They crouched behind the couch, the USB and journal stuffed into Julian's backpack. The door creaked open, revealing a man in a black suit, his face obscured by shadow. "Sullivan," he called, his voice chillingly calm. "I know you're here." Patrick's heart pounded as he gripped Julian's hand, the weight of his father's secrets threatening to crush them both. Elena's warning echoed in his mind. "Don't do anything stupid." Too late. They'd walked into a trap. The safe house's dim light flickered as the man in the black suit stepped inside, his boots thudding against the hardwood. Patrick's pulse thundered, his hand gripping Julian's so tightly his knuckles ached. The stranger's silhouette loomed, a gun glinting in his hand as he scanned the room. "Stay down," Julian whispered, his voice barely audible. Patrick nodded, his mind racing for an escape. The backpack with the journal and USB sat inches away, a ticking bomb they couldn't abandon. The man moved closer, his shadow stretching across the floor. "Sullivan, don't make this hard," he said, his tone cold but professional, like a predator who'd done this before. Julian gestured toward the kitchen, where a back door led to an alley. Patrick's eyes darted to the backpack. They'd have one shot to grab it and run. As the man turned toward the bedroom, Julian lunged, snatching the backpack and pulling Patrick toward the kitchen. The stranger spun, his gun raised, but they were already through the door, sprinting into the night. The Queen's Alley was a maze of dumpsters and chain-link fences, the air sharp with the scent of garbage and rain. Patrick's legs burned as they ran, Julian's hand a lifeline pulling him forward. Behind them, footsteps echoed, relentless. They ducked behind a rusted van, catching their breath as the man's silhouette passed under a streetlight, his gun still drawn. "We can't keep running," Patrick panted, his voice shaking. Julian's eyes were fierce, his jaw set. "We won't. Elena's our best shot." Patrick nodded, pulling out his phone to text her their location, his fingers fumbling. Alley off 34th. Help. Now. Minutes felt like hours, the distant wail of sirens their only hope. The man's footsteps slowed, then stopped. You can't hide forever, Sullivan, he called, his voice closer now. Patrick's stomach twisted. How did they know where to find them? Had Claire or Michael tipped someone off? Or was it Elena? Before he could spiral, a police cruiser screeched into the alley, its lights blinding. Elena leapt out, her gun drawn, barking orders at the man. Drop it. Now. The stranger hesitated, then bolted, vanishing into the shadows. Elena didn't pursue, her focus on Patrick and Julian. You two okay? She asked, her voice sharp but concerned. They nodded, still breathless, as she ushered them into the cruiser. You're lucky I was close, she said, speeding toward the precinct. That was one of Moretti's guys. You're in deeper than I thought. Patrick clutched the backpack, the journal and USB inside a heavier burden than ever. At the precinct, Elena locked them in an interview room for safety, promising to return after briefing her captain. Patrick slumped into a chair, his mind reeling. Julian sat beside him, their shoulders brushing. We're still here, Julian said softly, his hand finding Patrick's. That's what matters. Patrick managed a weak smile, but the weight of his father's secrets was crushing him. Elena returned with a grim expression. My captain's on board, but this is big, Patrick. Carver's got friends in high places, cops, judges, you name it. We need to move fast. She spread the journal's pages across the table, pointing to an entry about a shell company tied to Carver and Moretti. This links them to illegal rezoning deals. If we can verify it, we've got her. Patrick's eyes caught on a name in the journal, Sullivan Trust. His family's legacy, tainted by his father's choices. Dad used the company to funnel money, he said, his voice hollow. Claire and Michael, they had to know. Elena's gaze softened. Maybe, but you've got a chance to make this right. The next day, Elena arranged for protective custody at a new safe house, this one in Staten Island. As they settled in, Patrick played the second video again, Richard's words echoing. Do what I couldn't. He turned to Julian, who was studying the documents from the storage unit. Dad wanted me to end this, Patrick said. To stop Carver. Julian nodded, his eyes warm but resolute. Then we will. But we do it smart. They spent hours cross-referencing the journal with the documents, building a timeline of Carver's deals. One contract stood out, a land sale in Brooklyn, signed by Richard but notarized by someone named T. Hargrove. Patrick froze. Hargrove, the lawyer who read the will. The realization hit like a punch. Hargrove wasn't just a family attorney. He was part of the machine. Patrick's phone buzzed, an email from an unknown sender. Pier 17. Tonight. Bring everything, or Julian pays. His blood ran cold. They were out of time. Elena was unreachable, her phone going to voicemail. Patrick and Julian debated their options, the safe house's walls closing in. We can't trust anyone, Patrick said, his voice breaking. Julian pulled him close, their lips meeting in a desperate, grounding kiss. We trust each other, Julian said. That's enough. As night fell, they made a plan. They'd go to Pier 17, but not alone. Patrick called Marcus, who agreed to trail them discreetly, ready to alert Elena if things went south. The pier loomed ahead, its lights reflecting off the East River, a fitting stage for the truth to unravel. Pier 17 was a ghost at midnight, its shops shuttered, the East River lapping against the docks. Patrick and Julian stood beneath a flickering street lamp, the backpack heavy with the journal, USB, and documents. The dollar bill, Richard's cryptic key, sat in Patrick's pocket, a reminder of the journey that had brought them here. Marcus watched from a distance, hidden near a loading dock, his phone ready to call Elena. Patrick's heart pounded, his eyes scanning the shadows. Julian's hand brushed his, a silent promise. We're in this together. The air was thick with salt and tension, every creak of the pier amplifying their fear. A figure emerged from the darkness, Lydia Carver, her tailored coat and sharp features unmistakable. Flanked by two men, one of them the stranger from the safe house, she approached with a predator's calm. You're smarter than your father, Patrick, she said, her voice smooth but venomous. He thought he could outmaneuver me too. Patrick's grip tightened on the backpack. What do you want? he asked, his voice steady despite the dread pooling in his gut. Carver's smile was cold. Everything you found. The journal, the USB, all of it. Hand it over, and you and your boyfriend walk away. Julian stepped forward, his eyes blazing. And if we don't? Carver's smile didn't waver. You don't want to know. One of her men raised a gun, the barrel glinting in the lamplight. Patrick's pulse roared, but he held his ground. You're scared, he said, channeling his father's defiance. These documents tie you to Moretti, to fraud, to murder. Carver's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, sirens wailed in the distance. Marcus had come through. Her men tensed, but Carver raised a hand, her composure unshaken. You think the police will help you? Half of them are mine. She stepped closer, her voice dropping. Your father begged for your safety, Patrick. Don't make his sacrifice worthless. The words hit like a blade. Richard's letters, his videos, his regret, it was all for this moment. Patrick's hand brushed the dollar bill in his pocket, and a reckless idea sparked. You want the evidence, he said, pulling out the bill and holding it up. It's all tied to this. The key to everything. Carver's eyes flicked to the bill, confusion breaking her facade. It was a bluff, but it bought time. Headlights flooded the pier as Elena's cruiser screeched to a stop, officers spilling out with guns drawn. Drop your weapons, Elena shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Carver's men hesitated, then complied as more police arrived, their sirens a deafening chorus. Carver didn't flinch, even as cuffs clicked around her wrists. This isn't over, she hissed at Patrick, her eyes burning with promise. But Patrick didn't care. He'd done what his father couldn't. Expose the truth, no matter the cost. The aftermath was a blur. Elena took the journal and USB, her team securing the documents from the storage unit. Carver and Moretti were indicted, their empire unraveling as the media frenzy began. Sullivan Properties teetered on the brink of collapse, Claire and Michael grappling with the fallout. Patrick didn't gloat. He felt only a hollow ache for the family they'd never been. Weeks later, he and Julian sat in Central Park, the same bench where they'd shared that golden hour embrace. The dollar bill, now framed, hung in their apartment, a reminder of the journey that had tested their love and strength. You okay? Julian asked, his hand warm in Patrick's. Patrick leaned against him, the autumn leaves rustling above. I think so, he said, his voice soft but certain. Dad gave me $1, but he left me something more, a chance to be better than him. Julian smiled, pulling him closer, their lips meeting in a kiss that felt like home. The world had turned upside down, but they'd found their footing. Together, they'd faced secrets, danger, and loss, emerging not just as lovers, but as partners who'd rewritten their story. The dollar was a symbol, not of rejection, but of redemption, a single, humble key that unlocked a truth worth fighting for.